Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the Speculation Station podcast. It's me, Bodhi. Our usual host, Keter, has been kidnapped by Ewoks, and we've sent our best bounty hunters after him, so he should be returning for next podcast. But for tonight, I'm joined by Drew.
Howdy. And actually, Keter is just glued to the election coverage. He just can't get enough of it, so he's not joining us because he's watching the election.
Oh, okay, that makes more sense. And Rob.
Hola. I'm here from Mexico City.
So recently, I guess not quite as recently anymore. What was the date of it?
It's about 2 weeks ago, October 19th.
Gotcha. So October 19th, there was a grand tournament in Mexico City, and Rob won.
I did. The amazing, huge, and illustrious grand tournament of 8 players, including myself. But a grand tournament is still a grand tournament, and I still have a trophy. So a win is a win.
Hey, that's what matters. All right, so I guess then to recap for the listener, we're going to talk about what playing Armada is like in Mexico City. Rob's going to tell us all of the details about the grand tournament, and then, as always, we'll have an elevation section. So I guess just to get started, give us a broad overview. Tell us anything super cool.
Tell us the logistics, the planning of traveling internationally. I know some people might not want to travel to Mexico because of advisories and things like that, but give us the ground of how'd you hear about the tournament? When did you decide to go and all of that?
Sure. So, I'd be happy to start, an Armada travel podcast. I think as Americans, or especially as Texans, we drive around to a lot of different tournaments. We spend a lot of hours on the road, and going to wherever Worlds is. In Chicago, we might spend quite a few hours on a flight just to play like this beautiful ephemeral game that we love, because there aren't as many opportunities. There's only a finite number of opportunities to play it. With that said, kind of going back into May of this year or so, when grand tournaments were announced. And with or without Worlds, there were only going to be a limited number of such tournaments where you'd be able to gather a large number of people. And one of them that caught my eye was one of the few happening in North America in October, which was this one in Mexico City, which Mexicans abbreviate to CDMX, so I'll just refer to it as that from now on. So, in the Discord channel for AMG, they have all of these GTs listed out, but for whatever reason, there wasn't like a link to the CDMX one, and there was not any information. Like I tried to ask around on the Discord, and this is something I had on my radar that I wanted to go to. Traveling internationally does have a few hurdles. You need to, like, in the U.S., you need to be like an American citizen in order to like qualify, have the documents to qualify for a passport, and it takes like 6 weeks in the mail. But if you're going on a trip, within like 2 weeks, they'll let you like go to the office directly and pick it up, basically. And I knew that I wanted to travel internationally later this year, and I didn't want to kind of have that up in the air. So it was a nice little 2 birds, 1 stone opportunity. Play some Armada, get my passport figured out. And Mexico, flights to Mexico in general are pretty cheap. CDMX is a huge city. And so there are a lot of different connecting flights to their airport. So I think airfare ended up being something like $200, which is like cheaper than the flight to, say, Chicago, for me at least, here in Houston, Texas. So in one sense, having to go through all these like hurdles to get my passport and like I thought that there would be a big deal of like checking in customs, having my stuff searched through or having to declare this or that. But it felt just like taking a normal flight. Yeah, the airport's slightly bigger, but I really enjoy traveling in general. And so the opportunity to like see a different city was really neat. Um, I thought about taking a taxi, but it turns out CDMX has an amazing metro system of like above ground and like subway, railways, buses, all of it you can use with one single card. And so I made a huge, huge mistake where I didn't bring cash and I accidentally left my debit card at home. So I went to the money exchange counter with $3 in my pocket and I converted that to about 50 pesos, used that to buy a transit card, and I used that the whole weekend to get anywhere I wanted in CDMX. It was really like an amazing experience because these little train stations, um, they have like food and water, like sell like people like hawking it to you, and it's kind of where like people congregate. So it's super easy to like ask for directions, find your way around. It's really an interesting system because it's meant for all kinds of people to use. Like they have these colors and symbols, so you don't even need to read Spanish. Luckily for me, I was raised speaking Spanish by my Mexican mother and their side of the family. So even though I was very rusty, I could still ask and talk and say certain things. Um, and that helped me out a lot, but I have to say the people there were extremely friendly. So I'm used to this idea in North America of like what a GT is. And I'm thinking, okay, this is going to be like, I don't know, like a Lone Star Open or Las Vegas Open. They're going to have us like in this huge hotel or conference room. And I noticed that, uh, um, sorry, on Facebook, I found out information. They had a Facebook page where they had information about the event. And so I knew it was going to be at a game store. And when you look at it on like Google Maps, it's like in this, I guess what would you call it, like a set of row houses or something like that, where the facades of all the buildings kind of blend together along the street because it's like in like a midtown or like uptown area. And so I'm thinking like, okay, this place must be like really huge. Um, and I show up and the proprietor is like, "Oh, like you're here early." I was like messaging him on Facebook, say, "Let me in," and it's only like 1,200 square feet. It is like the hallways at some of these GT venues have been bigger than this entire game store, and so I get my own stuff set up. I help him set up. You know, uh, there we played Armada largely on these 2.5 foot white folding tables that everyone knows. He had some cardboard sheets that we could lay down to make things 3x6, and a lot of people brought their own mats, um, and we kind of made things work. Now we could. So there were, like I said, 8 Armada players. There were about 4 or 6 Legion players. Um, and so that was a pretty tight area on the inside where we had uh, like 2 or 3 Armada tables and then also 2 or 3 Legion tables and with their terrain and all of that stuff. Um, so the only place left for Armada was outside in this enclosed terrace. Um, it was a beautiful, dry 70 degrees Fahrenheit in CDMX that day. And I played 3 rounds of Armada underneath a corrugated piece of tin for shade. And man, there's nothing like open air Armada. It's felt so beautiful to play.
I'll have to see if on the YouTube version, if Josh can put like the pictures that you sent.
Yeah,
because it's like you visualize this, and it's still nothing like these pictures. Like it's almost jarring to look at.
It's an entirely different world. So I was talking to Lewis, one of the other players, and apparently a lot of game stores, in not only in CDMX but in other places in Mexico, are like this. Think like a condo or something like that, where the proprietor converts like the bottom floor into game space, and like maybe lives in the upper floors. And that's kind of giving you the idea. Like it felt very much like a home. And I was reading online that they had no outside food or drink because like we have a cafeteria. And I think that there's like a kind of different translation of what that word means. It was really more like a side kitchen. So I had the most wonderful hamburguesa ever while playing Armada, and yeah, it's always a good thing when a venue has food. But just being able to like see, oh, the kitchen's like right over there, and you can smell the food wafting over. Definitely a different experience. So I think I've kind of got the setting for y'all pretty well. Do you want me to go into like the actual tournament?
Yeah, that would be great. I think Drew has some questions for you about what you flew and the other fleets there.
Sure.
Yeah, I'd also like to hear about the other players in Armada. So were they all
Okay.
from the local area? Did they travel from different parts of Mexico, or were there any other international players?
So this game store happened to be pretty close to one of those train stations. So for instance, my hotel was near a train station called Villa de Cortez, and about 2 stations north was the game shop. So that's how I got there, basically walking. A number of other people, as far as I could tell, walked there too. And someone even took their bike and stored it in the back of the store while we were playing. And so I think generally speaking, all of them were in CDMX. It's a really huge city. So like, what do you want to call them, local or not? You know, I think a lot of players in America definitely have that. Well, I'm 45 minutes or an hour away, but I'm still a local player because we have 1 or 2 stores in our city, right? So I think almost all of them were local. I was definitely the only one from the Estados Unidos, and that doesn't mean that these were like easy players or people that didn't know what they were doing. One of them, who I played in the first round, actually had a job like working for like AT&T, where they were driving around a lot in America, and lived in Canada for a period of time. So I forget the city on the eastern half of Canada. They're actually playing IRL with some of the big names that we all know from the various discords and Canadian tournaments. So, he was telling me how they used a Canadian dollar as a squadron washer, which is a neat little international fact. But he's from Mexico, and so he moved back, I guess, to be with his family. And, spoke perfect English, right? Another player, spoiler alert, I was using a very similar fleet to the definitely not Nick, definitely not Tater list from Uprising. And one of the players had actually seen that list live at Uprising through Ion Radio's stream. And so they knew my whole build just as well as I did. And then it kind of runs the gamut. There was another player who ran this Akbar MC80 thing that we'll get into later, like a home one, and he hadn't even like seen Ryan Kingston because he had his list like typed out in Spanish and like cut and paste like pictures of the ship cards, which is really interesting. I think definitely the language barrier does gatekeep certain like skills and like knowledge about the meta for sure. But I don't think that means that like every player from another country is bad. As we'll get into the list, we'll see that there's some very competitive list building out there. And I think even from the people who don't speak English or aren't as connected to the online discussion community, you know, there's still some very novel and interesting ideas when it comes to list building, right? So it kind of goes in both directions. Okay, I guess I'll go ahead and talk about my list.
Hey.
So, my list is called Definitely Not Tater. It comes in at 394 points. We have Providence Carrier, General Grievous, Rune Hako, EWS, IF, Boost Comms, XRX, PDIC, LTT, Invincible, Thermal Shield. Then Transport, Hard Cell. Hondo, Projection Experts, Bomber Command. I really, really thought about TKs because I love TKs, but I'd workshopped this list a long, long time ago. Guess who I got the idea from, right? I tried it with TKs and Hondo, and I felt like that was just like too many tokens. So I just went with Hondo and tried to plan a little bit better what tokens I wanted. And then Gazanti with TI-99. I might have accidentally put somewhere online T-Series, but they're both the same points, and to be frank, they both look the same. So that's my defense.
You're saying all droids look the same?
Hey, look, you can't be racist to clankers like that, dude. Like we're at. All right. Okay, so here's where it gets a tiny bit spicy, right? We keep Watt. We have to, right? Now here's the choice. You know, do you take the I want to roll more dice dist, or do you want the more tactical experience of taking DFS in order to get those beautiful 12 squadrons? Well, what if I told you just take both and you only go with 11 squadrons? So we have Wat Tambor, Dis T81, DFS 311, only 4 vultures and 4 hyenas. I think you definitely need the 4 hyenas. There are some versions of this list where I was running 3 hyenas, 1 DBS, but I think the fact that DBS kills itself and it's just a little overkill, and sometimes that third red just ends up being a blank anyway. So to save the points, I think 4 hyenas is just solid. It's unfortunate, but it's the best that CIS can do when it comes to bombing. Objectives, everyone's new favorite, close range intel scan, asteroid tactics, infested fields. I have some theories about this list that can take different objectives, but I just went with something that was nice and easy. I guess I'll say I was really, really thinking about taking the Purgle objectives for very specific tactical things the Purgles can set up. So that would have been taking the red marked for destruction and the blue hyperspace migration. I don't think this list can take what do you call it? Asteroid mining? No.
Abandoned mining facility.
Abandoned mining facility. Yeah, this list cannot take AMF if you run into 5 CR90s and rogues, or another Wat Tambor, your SOL. So you probably have to keep asteroid tactics. Yeah. But I didn't want to go to a different country and not have Spanish cards and be like, hey, I want to play the longest objective in the game. So that being marked for destruction. So I chose a close range intel scan, and it worked out perfectly fine. I think that this is a really, really solid list. If you are playing against people who aren't teching against those thermal shields, whether it's with Boarding Trooper Vader, X-Rax, very strong dice fixing and APT, or something where you're adding dice, such as Swivel Mount and what do you call it? The Turbo Laser, where you get extra dice for those going faster against you. You know, if you don't have those extra tech for adding dice post gathering, I think you're really gonna have a hard time against this list. So yeah. With that said, that is the whole situation. I flew it basically in a very similar way to what Tater described. I was kind of workshopping with him in the DMs, and he advised against flying close to the 3-foot edge to get your Grievous proc. But I found it perfectly viable to just swing around one side. So on turn 2 or turn 3, you aren't, or like at the end of turn 1, I guess, you aren't completely like SOL if someone tries to jump you.
Okay. So tell us about
any questions?
yeah, tell us about your matchups. How
Okay.
many rounds was this tournament?
We were talking about it. I wanted to push for 4, but the guys voted for 3. And I think it kind of leads into that conversation certain people in the community have, where I think if you're like super, super serious, you can squeeze 4 into a day. But if it's like a multi-day event, or you want like a less completely draining experience, most people go for 3 in a day. And because of the small size of the venue, it was only going to be a 1-day event. So we just didn't have the option of moving to 2 days with the cut. It was this whole thing. I think it leads back into why there weren't any links on the Discord, where the person who was going to run the Mexican GT, like quit like less than 2 months before the event. So the store that picked it up was like doing a really nice thing for the community. So we kind of had to acquiesce to like what they were able to host, right? So we played 3 rounds. First round was against that sort of Canadian transplant player. He had a double Venator with one medical frigate, Pelta, 4 Aether Sprites and Anakin. One was set up as trying to remember which one was Tranquility and which one was Resolute. There was a Resolute Fat Venator and a Tranquility kind of like double salvo tech Venator. And he picked my close range intel scan. I think he was coming in at 400. If I remember correctly, and I always get them confused, I think Bale was his admiral, the one who could, because he was able. Was it Bale or Tarkin? He was able to give the 2 tokens to his Venators like every time for his Confires.
Probably Tarkin.
Yeah, I think it sounds like Tarkin. So anyway, especially if he's coming in at 400, if I'm not mistaken, Tarkin's fairly expensive. So we're playing my close range intel scan. With CRIS, I get the 2 dust fields. So I used one of the dust fields in the middle of the board, facing like how would I put it? Like in the middle of the board, close to his side, with the fat part of the dust field facing towards him and the skinny part of the dust field facing towards me, right? So like I guess perpendicular to the board. And then I ended up putting some of the asteroids kind of like in the middle, like far on both sides. So I wanted to divide the board in half. I didn't necessarily want to joust, even with thermals, taking the spats and then trying to, you know, I didn't want to get attacked like too many times in one turn. So because I had so many squadrons, he was fully deployed when I put my ships down, and he was like facing him. He was on my left side, all on that side of the dust field, and I did kind of far in my right. So that way, I can start going speed through from the beginning, dive and get on his side of the board before he had a chance to turn his vendors. And I didn't want to get to his side of the board um, at like a perpendicular angle and have to turn really hard. I wanted to come in at like a nice shallow angle and ride his board edge towards his fleet. Once again, just thinking about Grievous the whole time. So there was a slight danger of me cutting myself off using the dust field, but given that I could probably make sure the hyenas survive oh, sorry, it wasn't 4 Aether Sprites, excuse me. It was Anakin Axe 2 V19s. I'm sorry. I knew that like they couldn't necessarily jump over my screen to get to the hyenas before the hyenas started bombing. So like I had some confidence that even if I got stuck behind the dust cloud, that one like would survive. So on about turn 4, I was able to really connect and get a good shot on his Svat Venator. He deployed the Svat one towards the center and the Salvo one like more on the side. And even though he could kind of wheel around at a high speed, I think maybe like switching the deployment of them would have helped him better. That one was my first time in a very long time playing CRIS. There was a silly build that I had using a Starhawk in H9. So I knew like, oh yeah, you can like kind of get some points off of it. But it farms up pretty quick. And there's a lot of times, especially because he has that projection expert Pelta, where you might do damage to someone, like little plink damage, but it gets erased, right? These points stay forever. So I think that's one of the beautiful things about the list and the objective. I ended up taking down one of his Venators and completely dodging the salvo-based one, and a few of my squadrons died. So the margin was like close to 200 points with those tokens. So let me just try and pull up the T4 here. So that put me in a pretty good spot. I think like a 7 or an 8 after round 1. Unfortunately, he had a commitment. He had to leave after that round 1, so he had to drop. But it basically ended up evening things out so that no one had a buy from then on. Yeah, so on T4, it's called Armada GT MX1, I believe. I know we had to recreate the T4 a couple times. Okay. So, round 2.
Just to recap that, what was kind of the end result? How many victory tokens did you get?
Yeah.
What died? What was destroyed?
Sure. Let me see. Let me pull up my pictures real quick. Okay. So we ended it after completing round 5. I destroyed one of the Venators. I did not lose any ships. I lost a few squadrons. And let me see. Yeah, okay. My picture does not include the count of tokens. But I got 6 tokens. His Venator was, like 140 points, and my margin of victory was about 200 points. So I don't know the exact score. Yeah. Okay, looking it up on T4. The reason why I don't have the score for this particular one was because of the drop. The store owner included as like a buy with a custom MOV. We don't have like how many points he scored, but it is a small amount. Sorry, give me 1 second.
Oh, so that one was round one. It says you have a buy on the T4.
The person who had the real buy that round was Luis Hernandez, which you can see he got the 140-0 MOV.
Right.
It was just situation of us being not super experienced with T4, where we kind of put it in manually as a buy. Given that the player dropped, it didn't really affect, or it helped make the matches for the next 2 rounds work in T4.
Gotcha. Okay, so round 2 you played Leonardo Munez.
Right. So Leonardo was one of those players who I think was like less connected to the English speaking community. He was the one who had his list printed out himself. And so I told one of the other players, I'm like, hey, can you like tell him in Spanish about Ryan Kingston so we can, it'll help him. But this was an Akbar list. And remember kind of like what I said at the beginning, the dice add tech is really brutal when it comes to thermal shields. So he had 3 pretty big ships and no squadrons. So MC-30 Scout Frigate, so that's the red dice variant. He had Admiral Akbar on that one, Ramus Antilles, Ordnance Experts. Sorry, I'm trying to translate this from Spanish. EWS, I think, Sistema Alerta Temprana, 7 points. That's ECM. APT, and I think he had LTT on just about everything. And then the 8-point title that lets you affect an additional die. He had an Assault Frigate Mark II-A. Now here's the spicy part. He had a General Draven Officer, which is the guy that gives you an extra dice versus squadrons with intel and counter, which is like 5 of my squadrons. 6 of my squadrons, yeah, more than half my squadrons. Then we had decaps. I think this one. Yeah. Countermeasures, Electronicas. Okay, ECM. And then once again, LTT. So there's only 4 upgrades on this assault frigate for 100 points. And it can throw some pretty big dice when you add in Akbar. Then we had the MC-80 assault cruiser, which I believe is the more expensive variant. So we had expert shield tech. We had what do you call it? Engine techs. Once again, ECM. And then this variant gets 2 defensive retrofits, which I think is really interesting. So we took blast doors. And what is that? 6 points. Sparos Lideres. To 6 point. Oh, leading shots. And then quad battery turrets, I think. Torreta de baterías quadruple. Sounds like quad battery turrets. And then Defiance. So his I was really thinking about going second. You know, my objectives had won me the day against another beefy list. You know, I would probably be able to survive a few attacks, but to be honest, I was so scared of getting, you know, walloped by this assault frigate and the assault cruiser, and then having the scout frigate line up like a perfect double arc. You know, I really decided like, okay, I'm gonna go first because one of the ways you can kind of defeat these lists is by being super aggressive. Um, so his objectives was for the red, we had advanced gunnery, of course. Um, we had dangerous territory for the blue. I'm trying to translate the yellow.
Was he second player?
He was second player.
Okay, what objective did y'all play?
Let me see if I think dangerous territory. Give me a second. Sorry, I'm gonna look at the pictures and see if I have it. Oh, yeah, contested outpost. It was the yellow. Sorry, I had to translate for a second. So with his contested outpost, I always expect players to put the outpost as far into the corner as they can, even though it does have to be beyond distance 5. I think generally, almost every time that I play contested outpost, it's something like they'll place a rock on my side. I'll put a rock barely less than distance 1 from their corner, and then I'll put another rock barely more than distance 1 from their corner. So that way the station goes like kind of like as far into the middle as possible, in order to keep them from like I don't know, like turtling up or something. In this one, I actually didn't do that. I put more of the rocks in the middle, or yeah, more of them in the middle, and more of them a little bit on my side. If he was squadless, I wanted places for my hyenas and stuff to hide behind. In contested outposts, the station does not obstruct, and so I knew that area would have like a lot of shooting, like ship to ship. But I didn't, you know, some of these rebel ships kind of have like 2 blue flak or this or that, to where it would be pretty rough. To my surprise, he doesn't put his station directly in the corner, but it's probably like distance 5 plus maybe distance 3 from one of the edges. Once again, he is squadless, and I have a lot of squads, so we get the wonderful deployment advantage going on. And he places his assault carrier almost in the far corner. His scout torpedo, sorry, scout MC-30, kind of diagonally, about distance 2 towards the middle from that, and about like another like distance 2 or 3 towards the middle from that is the assault frigate. And so my question for me is, do I joust, or do I do what I did to the first guy and come in from the side, try and pick 1 or 2 things off, and, you know, try to fight his ships one at a time? I kind of deliberated about this for a little while, because I already had my Gazanti placed directly across from his assault frigate, facing diagonally towards the edge, in other words, towards the station. So I can either line up my support transport and my Providence, parallel with that Gazanti, or I could put them behind the Gazanti towards the middle and try and slowly arc around and get to that assault frigate. But, you know, the MC-30 goes speed 4 and has a pretty good maneuver chart, and the MC-80, you know, it has engine techs. So I don't think there's a world where I just get to engage. He'll just let me engage with one part of his fleet and not the other. So jousting it is. I deploy in my corner, directly across from his MC-80, with a slight diagonal tilt towards the board edge. According to my camera roll, this is when my hamburguesa arrives. So at the end of round 1, he places his MC-30 on the station by doing a super hard turn towards the middle of the board. And his MC-80 follows that turn slowly, and he's just brought his assault frigate up a little bit. As I'm angling towards the 3-foot board edge, I'm in a double arc with my Providence from his MC-80. Plus, I could take some, flight shots from his MC-30, which I can't really touch because he's like canceling 3 dice at a time. With that said, we go on to the next turn. Now, there was something in this situation where I was really worried about kind of like where his MC-80 would go. I realize now, of course, you're fighting Akbar, double arcs don't matter. But I didn't want to be in a situation where I was like kind of like getting in a ram battle with something that had like the same amount of health as me while I was like taking some big shots. And I didn't necessarily want it to like get away. So I had to balance the line of getting into a position where I could like threaten it without totally giving up everything. So I end up actually going first with the Providence on turn 2. I usually dial something like nav, and then the rest is like squadron. So it's not like I would have been missing out on like a big squadron push or something like that anyway. And what it does is I get further towards the 3-foot edge and turn my nose more towards the middle of the board. So instead of so I'm fully in range of that MC-80, and I've got PDIC to help out, and I'm not outside of distance 5 of my transport, which is really nice. Like, I've been used to playing Beast of Burden, and the tolerances for that are really tight. So being able to like heal yourself up with projection experts, it makes things really a lot less tense. So I do wait for him to move up with this MC-80. He uses engine techs, and it's in a really crazy spot. His MC-80 has sort of, what would you call it, crossed the T, and it's getting double arced by my side and rear of my Providence. He jumped almost over my Providence, and my poor little hard cell is like at close range of this thing's other side. So he's about to pull off like the most intense Akbar slash I think anyone ever has in the history of the game. With that said, though, at this point, on the start of round, let's see if I can find that round counter. Round 3. He's got 0 shields on the front of the MC-80, 2 shields on the side where my hard cell is, and very few shields on the side that my Providence is. Yeah. Okay. So if it's like one of those situations where like the points of the battle don't fully describe what would have happened, right? Because he's set up for the most amazing first move. But by going first, I can, it's turn 3. I have that squadron dial. all four of my bombers are in place. I have the X racks, um, and he has very little shields from the sort of like plink shots and bombing from the previous turn. So it's almost like a last first, really. And I get the exact number of damage that I need to kill his MC80. So after it leaves the board, it he doesn't have a lot that can threaten me away from the station. Once again, the MC30 is facing towards the middle of the board, so it's more or less getting chased. And then it's just a matter of trying to clean up the assault frigate. Eventually I do, and I continue to claim spots on the station. But something that happens is interesting. I guess like eyes bigger than my stomach. I continue trying to chase down that MC30, and the kind of gross thing is that he's got Akbar on that one, so he's still pulling out the big, 5 dice plus dice shots, you know, and I lose my Providence trying to chase it down. Luckily, I can get the Kazanti to turn and continue to claim the station. But I very foolishly I put a confire on the transport at the very end instead of trying to do a squadron to get the bombers to chase it down on the last turn. So the MC30 survives. Something interesting about that match was the little plinks that the vultures can do to a ship like the MC30 that really relies on it taking damage to its shields. Its title isn't super useful because it's only 1 dice can be affected. And at some point you kind of run out of shields to redirect that one little damage to. And against a squadless fleet, you can kind of set up your squads like landmines. The vultures, they don't care if they're being commanded or not when it comes to bombing ships. So that part was really handy. The MOV ended up being a 7 with 346 of my points to 243 of his. I believe I captured the station for 3 or 4 turns. I ended up flipping the objective because of that super aggressive MC80 play that did not work out for him. So yeah.
Very nice. So you killed his 80. You lost your capital ship trying to chase down his 30, and you got a 7-4. All right. And then so you were at the top of the leaderboard after round 2, and you played. He actually got second place. You only beat him by 1 TP overall, but then you played Luis Hernandez in the last round.
Right.
So tell us about that matchup.
Right. So I talked about Mexican players that were connected to the English-speaking scene. Luis was one of those bilingual players, and one of the people who had watched Ion Radio's coverage of Uprising with more or less this exact same fleet in it. So I think it was like a worthy opponent for the last round. His list was Sloan. So unfortunately, even if I go to a different country, I can't get away from the Texas Sloan meta. And he had something interesting, basically a Sloanager. He still had some of the big hitters in there. So let me see if I can pull up the list real quick. But he had Merrick Jendon, of course, Vader, and his last one was Mauler. So that is an insane amount of squad damage, especially to aces, which a lot of CIS power comes from those specific aces. And plus with Mauler, I mean, losing 1 health off of a 3 health squad, we all know how terrible that is. So with that said, he had a small number. Sorry, let me see if I can pull up his list. Give me a second. Yeah, okay. Um, so Vader, Merrick, Jendon, Mauler, right? Saber, that's even worse for me in my counter in TI-99. Um, two generic interceptors in black. Um, so using all the good names there. On his onager, he had Price, veteran gunners, and gunnery chief Varnillion. Medical team instead of engine techs. Um, and then the red long range bombardment cannon and Cataclysm, which is a little bit surprising. You don't see Cataclysm that much anymore. Um, and then we had a Gazanti with Hondo, Comsnet, Suppressor, um, Quasar with Sloan, Garrett, who you don't see super often, Flight Controllers, Boosted Comms, Expanded Hangar Bay, Pursuant. Pursuant really interesting because it's only a 2-point title. And if I understand the card correctly, you basically get 2 dials when you use it, which is a really interesting effect. And in my opinion, I think Saloninger, yes, you want that long range strike capability. I don't think it benefits from Squall as much because you already have Speed 5 and Snipe in your arsenal. And maybe, yeah, and boosted comms in this case. So that's just my thoughts. So deployment on this one. I was kind of dreading this. The dice fixing can be pretty brutal. You know, after you take the thermal and the obstruction, they can pretty much set the dice to whatever they want with this kind of list. So we had a bit more of a tense deployment, given that we both had a large number of squads. I chose to go second. He was at about 400 points, or he was at 397. So I chose for him to go second, and we all know what the correct objective to choose is. That's asteroid tactics. So he deploys his Gazanti kind of in the middle, and then we deploy all of our squadrons. He deploys his Quasar more in the middle, and then I have to put down, I believe I have to put down my hard cell, which so I've got like my Gazanti kind of like on one side of his Quasar, and my hard cell kind of like on the other side of his Quasar. And so it's left for him to put down the big boy, the Onager. And he kind of hovers, thinking he's going to put it in the center, with Cataclysm, maybe aiming for a joust. But he actually deploys it way off in the corner. And I think there's some wisdom to that, because you don't, if you've got the Onager, you can force the opponent to come to you, and it gives you a little more idea of where you want the fight to be. And because I had the objectives in a triangle in the middle, I understand why he didn't want to deploy that Onager in the middle. So he puts it in the corner, and it can probably snipe my Gazanti like at the start of turn 2, since he's first player. So I have a decision. Do I put my Providence directly across from that Onager in the corner, or do I put it in the middle? I'm not going to get Grievous, but maybe I can get some asteroid tactics going on. And I decided to put it in the middle, and that works out really well for me. So this kind of scares him, because going at speed 3, I can make a credible threat against his Quasar. Even though I don't have like a ton of firepower at long range from the ship, the Quasars are notoriously brittle, right? So round 1, I start off going at speed 3 with that Providence in the middle of the board, angling towards his Onager, hoping to collect a few asteroids on the way. He takes a hard turn with the Quasar towards the corner where his Onager is. Suppressor moves forward slowly, and he actually moves up really far, like speed 2 or speed 3, with that Onager, trying to snipe out the Gazanti. So that's where we are. Top of turn 2. I really hate to say it, but I got extraordinarily lucky. Where, given that he's first player, he doesn't have Gunner. He's Gunner Chief Artillery in his blank, right? And he rolls no accuracies, veteran gunner, no accuracies again. So even if he had used the deplete your shield to fix a die, I would have been able to chuck away that evade, and his volume of damage was so low that the Gazanti survives. And that was really unfortunate for him, because being able to snipe out an activation early, especially before our fleets have clashed, would have been crucial. As additionally, denying TI-99 is actually a really strong move, especially if you're going to fight a squadron war. So I continue turning in with the Providence, and I have tried to chase down Quasars before, and they're pretty decently maneuverable, and I know I could kill it, but I really, really want to kill the Onager, because it's worth more points, and being on a large base, slightly less likely to get away. So I go to try and cut it off. So I move first with my Providence. And the beautiful thing about this fleet is, like, man, you kind of gotta forget all the rules of Armada, and you gotta put your Providence in danger, especially to get use out of it where it's kind of like very close range focused firepower. It's just something beautiful, just going straight up to an Onager's front arc and saying, "Try me." Especially with those arc lines, I don't really manage to get it, but I was very close to getting a double arc. So I've got my squads positioned around my Gazanti, which is still, in the shadow of my Providence, and my hard cell is super safe in the back towards the middle of the board. This forces him to come to me with his squadrons. I can kind of leapfrog my hyenas forward and touch the edge of his Onager, but if he wants to stop me, he's got to jump over the whatchamacallit, the exogorths that are, surrounding my Providence, and into the flak bubble of my Providence and my Gazanti, and the TI-99 bubble, and all of that stuff. So as he's kind of thinking about pouncing me, I go with one of the smaller ships, and I just chuck a vulture or two at black. Okay, I'm gonna get countered. I don't really care. The point is, I'm kind of gumming up the works. I'm getting just Vader engaged here, just someone else engaged there, so that way he's forced to kill these puny little vultures I don't care about, to mess up his own alpha. And that part, strategically, works perfectly. The 2 black flak of the Providence plus 1 black from the Gazanti it just melts his squadrons. Especially like Mahler that has 1 brace. I mean, his alpha is still really successful. Poor Wat Tambor doesn't even get to activate. Taking a shot from 1 squadron, then taking 4 straight damage from Vader, then getting landed on by Mahler. I really thought I was going to lose the squadron war based off of that insane alpha. But the fact that he's stuck there now, maybe 1 or 2 squadrons get isolated by the Exochorus and, like I said, the flak, I managed to pull it around. And once the Squadron War dust settles, I still have like 3 vultures or excuse me, 3 hyenas and Dist. Maybe, let's see, let me double check this screenshot. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, I have 4. I still save my hyenas, which is the really big part. I think like I rolled the 3 counter 3 from TI-99 like 6 times. From the 4 vultures and Watt. And like, even one of the hyenas once. Because like, especially when you have Swarm in the mix, getting 3 damage off on a counter, on a Brace Squadron is just absolutely brutal. And it's pretty much the best damage that you're hoping for when you activate them anyway. I think Grievous, it's really tough to say. I think Grievous might be the best Separatist squad commander, given that, like, I don't know, CIS squads are good at dying. And you can actually get some decent utility out of it. So we do the whole ram battle thing between the Providence and the Onager. And he's really hesitant to attack with his Quasar. Maybe it's because of the salvo, always having salvo up with Grievous, or he wants to keep Garant alive to help that ship last longer. And he doesn't manage to really snake the Quasar behind the Onager, like to run away. It's like a blessing and a curse, ramming his own Gazanti to like continue commanding squads versus like trying to save points and not get tabled. Like, what do you do, But the Providence just has just an unsustainable amount of dice that it can throw at that Onager. So eventually it goes down, and I get some of the hyenas to chase down the Quasar, and it's basically a tabling. There aren't any objective points with this one, but it ends up being 481 because of all my squadrons that he destroyed. And both of my support ships survive as well. So I think this might be another one where it's like one dice roll could have changed the whole thing. I could have completely lost the Squadron War without TI-99, and I don't know if I would have been able to cut off his Onager if I didn't have sort of like the activation padding with that little Gazanti.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes 10-1s can be really deceptive because you're brawling, and so one ship limps away on one hole. If the dice would have just been a little bit different, then it would have been a 6-5 the other way, or 5-6 the other way, or even a 10-1 the other way. So sometimes 10-1s are bloodbath and they're brutal, and sometimes it's like, well, that doesn't tell a good story.
No, but I think I'm just so thankful that this game has a win big system rather than win at all system. We've all played Cut Armada once or twice, and I just love this idea where I can force my opponent to make an aggressive play. I can make an aggressive play myself because I'm looking for a certain payout. And I think that's one of the reasons why I like this list a lot.
Well, sweet. And congratulations on taking down the GT.
Yes. And like looking at the TP difference, it could have very easily been a second place finish. But I'm very glad it ended up being this way. So I got myself a ruler set, and I got myself a trophy, and it means a lot to me.
A ruler set that will be perfect for display only.
That's exactly what it's still sealed in the wrapper. I'm gonna have like a shadow box on my wall.
I have mine from LSO just stuck in the package still. Like it's so unfortunate because they're really pretty, but
I like the Ahsoka aesthetic, right? It's like a tie-in to the TV show. I wish we could still get cool amount of product that tied into these things.
Right.
So yeah, just a nice quick 3-rounder. After that, I left the store and I went to a little restaurant on the just right on the corner. I handed them like 10 pesos and I had a little pan dulce, a little sweetbread as I ate on the train home. So yeah. And then the next day was sightseeing for me. I would have loved to play more Armada, but like I said, it's just what the store could support. And so I went to like this like ancient Aztec ruin site that was so cool. It's giant pyramids, 1 hour outside the city. And I don't know, there's not a lot of American cities you can go and get the same sightseeing experience. So yeah, it turned into a nice vacation for me in the end of the day.
Nice. Do you have any final thoughts before we move on to the elevation section?
Yeah. Actually, so I want to talk a little bit more about the language divide. Okay, I know Adrian out there. Shout out to Adrian from Iron Radio. Was looking for a Darth Vader alt art in Spanish. I asked, and a lot of the distribution of cards is actually in English. When a lot of times they'll order from Amazon because they don't have the same like FLGS kind of structure that we do in America, and the distribution for cards for whatever reason is in English. Um, as far as I know, in some of the like maybe Wave 7 or so, they might have stopped producing Spanish cards. It's really unfortunate. I remember at Worlds 2023 seeing a leader from the Spanish community kind of like beg high level AMG staff members like, please continue to support the community in Spain. I wonder if part of that was separate language cards. For anyone out there who's building an Armada tool or thinking about designing a game system or some homebrew or something like that, I highly encourage you to, you know, think about different language distribution because there's just a big, wonderful, really friendly Armada community out there that would love to be able to play your game. I think that's my final thought.
Awesome. And then I guess one other thing that I wanted to add, we were kind of talking about before the podcast.
Sure.
You run Imperial Star Shop,
Right.
which is for the listener. It's currently, as of recording, down. But this is where I got all my rapid reinforcements, like fancy printed cards.
Yeah.
Rob has a bunch of mats. Do you wanna
Sure.
say anything else about that?
Right. So I think we all remember the sort of like raw emotion we felt when Armada got canceled in about May of last year, right? We all knew that the game was on the chopping block for some time. It was just kind of like a matter of when. It's something that affected me kind of like emotionally, and seeing the community really shrink in size for this couple of months made me it discouraged me from continuing operating the business. Like as the sole proprietor, every time someone fulfills an order, I'm the one who has to like go to my printer, slap it on the box, drive down to the post office. And I was really worried about the health of the community and if it was something that would be like worth my time, and I actually kind of got inspired. After seeing results from SLO and some of the pictures that people posted from basically the largest tournament in that community's history, like they were some of my like loyal customers, and to see that so many like my products that like I helped design were like still being used, like still as far as I know like the highest quality mat out there, and the fact that I still have a ton of them in my garage. I'm gonna bring the website back. Long story short, there's a huge, I wouldn't say it's a promotion, but a huge increase in responsibility in my day job. We have a big project that's due on November 11th. Sometime after that, I would expect the website to go back up. there's already a new landing spot on the site. I'm really excited because I'm moving away from one hosting service called Wix to another one called Shopify. It's going to be way more automated, a lot less work on my shoulders, and hopefully that means that we get orders out faster. As far as I know, there aren't any, missing orders out there. But it was just one of those things because that news hit in the middle when I was about to reinvest in a new site. It made me question if it was really worth it. But the fact that this podcast is going, so many others are. People in different countries who don't even have the same support system that we do in America, they're still playing, and a lot of them in Mexico were using like fabric sheets or like vinyl, really not great quality stuff. I'm like, man, I want to continue to provide like the best thing that these people can use. So, yeah, I'm going to continue. Just keep an eye out.
Very cool.
Awesome.
Well, we will link your website and hopefully get you some traffic and get people the material they need to continue to enjoy this game. So let's go ahead and move to the. Oh, you had something, buddy?
Yeah, I was going to actually say if you want to give us our first elevation.
Yeah, I'll give a quick elevation. I'd like to elevate the keywords. I would have liked to see what AMG or FFL or whoever was going to do with those Clone War faction keywords, droid and clone. I think those would have been cool. I also think, you could play in with how different things interact against, droids or clones, even whether it's the like exogorts or purgles or, different things in the game. I think that would be cool. It'd be hard to balance, admittedly so. It'd be, if one faction is better at objectives overall than another faction, that would be hard to balance. But I was interested to see what was in the works there, and I think that would be my elevation.
I think that would be really like, yeah, what kind of exogorth wants to eat like a robot, Maybe they crave flesh.
Rob, do you want to give our next elevation?
Sure. As we're talking about updating rules or systems of various scopes, I want to talk about the damage deck. It's the same one we've had since, I don't know, 2015 or whatever. And something that's interesting, we've all been in a situation where, your ship is it's limping away, on turn 6, and they pull blinded gunners or something where they have to like remove a dice or something like that, right? And if you look at it, you have cards that will affect almost any order. You have cards that limit your navigation ability. You have cards that limit your engineering ability and your ability to concentrate fire. But there aren't any cards that specifically eliminate your or disrupt your ability to command squadrons. There is comms noise, but one that's like kind of a general one, and it's like not super common. But besides that, there's no the amount of your squadron value is reduced by half, or you cannot command squadrons at long range, or something like that. And I think it's one reason why squadron play, whether you believe it's overrepresented or not, is very powerful. Is because it cannot really be disrupted or interacted with by your opponent. So that would be something I would like to see. A card like that in the damage deck.
Honestly, you bring up a good point that the damage deck has been the same thing since the very beginning of the game.
Yeah. What if Clone Wars factions had like different damage decks than other factions, right? Because they came with their own starter pack, right?
Right.
So there was an opportunity there to get a new one, or you could kind of like, I don't know, choose a damage deck for your opponent based on several different templates.
or have it like tied to objectives or something.
Sure.
One thing that we kind of discussed a while back, I think, was like the Legion objective system is really neat in that deployment is one of the customizable features of each individual game. And so having like I don't know, maybe it would have to be like a shared damage deck that's tied to a certain objective choice. I don't know. Just something a bit more variable could be really interesting.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I talked about deployment a lot during my 3 games that weekend, right? But it all kind of went down the same way. Right? It's that one dimensional of like, okay, I put down the Kazanti. Okay, I put down all 11 of my or all 10 of my squadrons. Now you go, you know? And yeah, that would be really interesting. Different ways to deploy.
All right. So I'm going to be a bit of a wimp this week. I've been trying desperately hard to think of something to elevate, and nothing's coming to mind. But next week, I believe the plan, or whenever we record our next podcast, the plan is to talk about the Ozark Mountain Open that happened last weekend. We're going to try and get the winner on for that. And our very own Captain Ketter did. He made it in the top 4. So that's the plan. And maybe I'll come up with something good to elevate then. Probably Gar related. I've been playing a lot of Gar, and I don't know. I used to think they were really good, but I have not been winning games. You know what is winning games though is Separatists. Like this tournament and quite a few others have been doing really well for droids.
I'm a huge fan of net listing. You know, kind of playing Armada maybe like a fighting game where you choose a character that has a move set. I'm proud. I'm proud of Separatists, but I hope that we can continue to have variety. You know, it's
Sure.
like it was dominated by like RMM for a while. I was guilty of that. So I'm glad that Nick and Tater and hopefully myself has shared a lot of insights about this list. I hope we find something new before Worlds.
Well, cool. Well, thanks for joining. Oh, is there a delay on mine? Because it seems like I start
Slightly,
talking, and
yeah.
then like 3 seconds later, y'all start talking, and it's like I was talking. Josh, edit this out in post. Anyway,
You think he's gonna edit this?
he better.
Hey,
There's,
I mean,
don't
there's
know.
no rush on
Anyway,
this episode.
I mean, while we're just riffing, Josh, don't edit this part out. But hey, Lark, I was here when it started, and I'm here till the end. So there you go. Don't add.
Yeah, can we hold on for a second? Because
Uh-oh.
Lewis had the balls to call Drew out for not showing up halfway through the podcast. And I wasn't able to make it to that one, but they did not say when they were starting recording. And poor Drew here had no idea.
I mean, I wasn't going to throw anybody under the bus, but yeah, they said 6:30, and then they started at 5:30 because Josh doesn't know how the time zones work. Watch this part get edited out. But yeah, we had a plan, and we didn't stick to the plan, so it's all good. But yeah, thanks for joining us, Rob, and thanks for the insight on the Mexico GT. That sounds like it was a blast, and it was an interesting experience. And that's it for me.
Yeah, Joel too.
Yeah.
Yeah, to all my new Spanish friends, bienvenidos to the English-speaking podcast world, and gracias. It's an amazing games.
All right, everyone. Have a good night. Talk to you soon.